What happens when a royal prince once hailed as charming and untouchable is stripped of his polished image, only to reveal a trail of scandals, betrayals, and crimes that shocked the world? From cheating and fraud to corruption, abuse, and even whispers of treason, Prince Andrew's fall from grace is unlike anything the monarchy has faced in modern times. Stay with us, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why the world turned against him, and why his name has become a symbol of disgrace. Prince Andrew was born into a palace where privilege replaced discipline and golden walls shielded him from the consequences of his actions. Now, at 65, the glossy mask of charm has crumbled, leaving behind not a royal hero, but a legacy of shame. The man once paraded as the monarchy's loyal soldier has instead become its deepest humiliation, a burden the crown can no longer hide. The scandals that followed him weren't whispers from jealous critics. They were warnings, clear signs ignored by a palace desperate to protect its image. Long before the headlines, long before the accusations, Andrew lived as though rules applied to everyone but him. And by the time the world finally dragged his secrets into the light, one truth became undeniable: he didn't suddenly turn cruel, he always was. From the very beginning, Prince Andrew was raised in the shadows of unchecked cruelty, permitted to taunt, provoke, and dominate without consequence. One of the earliest and most disturbing accounts comes from Windsor Castle. Biographer Ingrid Seward recalls that at just 5 years old, Andrew wandered into the stables where guards and grooms worked in silence. Instead of respect, he mocked them, ridiculing their rigid discipline, kicking the dogs, even striking at horses' legs with sticks. When the servants pleaded with him to stop, he defied them, reveling in his impunity. Finally, pushed past their limits, 2 grooms hoisted the young prince and tossed him into a heap of manure, shoveling dung over him. It should have been a brutal lesson in consequences, but the moment passed without correction. No one demanded he change. No one dared. And this pattern only grew darker. In another incident, Andrew tormented a palace footman until the man, breaking every rule of royal protocol, struck him across the face. The blow left Andrew sprawled on the ground, bloodied and black-eyed, stunned by the audacity. The servant immediately offered to resign, prepared for severe punishment. Yet the queen refused, choosing to protect her son rather than discipline him. She believed that Andrew had rightfully earned it. The footman remained. The child who could be hit yet still stay protected learned something dangerous. Your strength lies in inciting others. Your privilege is in enduring their strikes. These early events weren't mere mischief. They resemble prophetic glimpses of how Andrew would act when under public scrutiny. The boy who ridiculed guards at 5 grew into the man who insisted on having the curtains drawn just so. Stuffed bears were arranged in a way that left the staff terrified of minor errors. The child whose face bore the marks of a footman's blows became the adult who was wounded by words, by press releases, by denials. In the early 1980s, while Princess Diana enchanted the world with her grace and charm, Andrew was already cultivating a very different image. He was supposed to be the charming youngest son, dashing in his uniform, the bachelor prince whose love affairs would thrill the public. Instead, he earned a reputation within palace walls as spoiled, arrogant, and disturbingly immature. Household staff described him as so demanding that it bordered on cruelty, barking orders with the entitlement of someone who saw himself as superior, almost godlike. Charlotte Briggs, a former maid, disclosed how Andrew once berated her for leaving a tiny gap in his curtains, shaming her for a mistake that no one else would even notice. This behavior was not a rarity. It was a regular occurrence. His bedrooms were cluttered with stuffed animals meticulously arranged in a specific order. If servants dared to shift a teddy bear or failed to position them according to his exact specifications, he would erupt in a fit of childish fury. To outsiders, it appeared quirky. To those who served him, it was nothing short of abuse. A 35-year-old man throwing tantrums like a 5-year-old. His mother made excuses for him. His father, Prince Philip, referred to him as the spare, a man destined to always be second to Charles, yet unburdened by the duties that the crown required. That unchecked freedom only fueled the darker edges of Andrew's character. By the time he reached adulthood, the tabloids had christened him Randy Andy, a prince who basked in his reputation as a playboy. While his brothers kept a wary distance from the press, Andrew flaunted his excesses. He courted models and actresses, paraded his wealth, and carried himself like a man untouchable. But when he married Sarah Ferguson in 1986, the supposed fairy tale crumbled almost overnight. Their union was riddled with scandal. Ferguson's very public indiscretions made headlines, while Andrew's own reckless behavior further eroded their marriage. The divorce might have severed ties, yet their strangely close relationship afterward only fueled more rumors and whispers. By then, Andrew was no longer seen as a proud face of the monarchy, he had become a volatile liability. The 1990s dragged his reputation deeper into the gutter. As Britain struggled through recession and austerity, Andrew burned through taxpayer money with shameless abandon. He became known as Air Miles Andy, jetting around the world on private planes and helicopters, racking up millions in costs while offering little in return. Newspapers splashed his lavish trips and unchecked spending across their front pages, painting the picture of a prince addicted to privilege. The public's resentment grew. Why should a man who contributed so little bleed the nation dry while ordinary families fought to make ends meet? Andrew brushed it all off, believing his royal blood made him immune to consequence. But behind palace doors, even insiders began to take notice. Staff whispered about his obsession with appearances. He stacked his uniform with medals he barely earned, chased after glamorous women in nightclubs, and flaunted friendships that gave him an illusion of status. Friends who once praised him now privately mocked him, calling him naive, easily flattered, and dangerously gullible. In his desperate hunger to be admired, he only revealed how little respect he truly commanded. Later on, this weakness would prove to be the decisive factor in his demise. Andrew was looking for purpose when his Navy officer career ended in the late 1990s. His appointment as a commercial ambassador was intended to increase British trade overseas. Rather, his role turned into yet another scandal. There were rumors that he had connections to corrupt businessmen and tyrants. According to leaked U.S. diplomatic cables, British officials who collaborated with him were embarrassed by his haughtiness, rudeness, and dismissiveness. By using his royal status to get access and favors, he had transformed the office into a venue for his personal networking. Once a symbol of military discipline, the prince now stands for corruption and greed. Despite the constant mockery from the media, Andrew maintained his arrogant demeanor. The protection of the monarchy was his only line of defense. Because she thought her son's honor was valuable, the Queen protected him by paying off his bills and averting his scandals. However, the personnel at Buckingham Palace had already come to the conclusion that the public was only beginning to suspect. Andrew posed a threat to the survival of the crown in addition to being immature. His behavior was irresponsible, his circle of friends became more toxic, and his selfishness was unrelenting. If you think it's crazy, you'll be shocked to learn that Jeffrey Epstein was introduced to him by Ghislaine Maxwell. All Andrew could see were the opulence, the private planes, the opulent residences, and the access to celebrities and models. The price of that friendship was something he did not see, or did not choose to see. In elite circles, Epstein was already rumored for actions that ought to have sent any good man running. Andrew, however, did not run. He accepted it. Status and greed had blinded him. Those who had put up with his rage, his conceit, and his entitlement understood why. This was who he had always been. Later, the image of Andrew with his arm around Virginia Jur's waist, a minor, and Maxwell grinning in the background would horrify the public. The world found it alarming. That was confirmation to the palace personnel. They were now exposing the guy they served in the most repulsive way possible. This man had yelled over curtains and stuffed animals, demanded compliance, and paraded through life without shame. It was only a teaser. You will now be aware of the specifics. Details that hurt and disgust. I hope you're prepared. Even palace insiders started to doubt Andrew's future by the end of the 1990s since his reputation had deteriorated so much. It should have been a new beginning after his 1996 divorce from Sarah Ferguson. Instead, it ushered in a fresh round of humiliation. Just a few months later, tabloids featured pictures of Ferguson's financial advisor sucking her toes. Both of them were damaged by the controversy, but the public was perplexed by Andrew's insistence on keeping his distance from her. After their divorce, he intermittently lived with her for years, which fueled rumors that the two were financially involved in ways they never fully disclosed. Andrew, meanwhile, immersed himself in the way of life that made him known as Randy Andy. Nearly every week, his romances with socialites, models, and actresses were reported, but his actions appeared more desperate. He allegedly dated Caprice Borat at one point, but their relationship ended due to mockery. Public perception of the once handsome prince was deteriorating, and he was ridiculed as a middle-aged man who was holding on to his boyish persona. Many hoped that he would be given distinction when the Queen named him Britain's Special Representative for International Trade and Investment in 2001. It issued him a license instead. Theoretically, he was supposed to help British businesses expand overseas. In reality, he used the position to build his own empire. He surrounded himself with contentious businessmen, slept in opulent hotels, and traveled on private planes. There were rumors that he was making friends with Sif, the son of Muammar Gaddafi, and other autocrats, which made people wonder why a senior royal was hanging out with dictators. In 2010, leaked U.S. diplomatic cables verified the statements made by officials for years. U.S. diplomats said Andrew was arrogant and impolite, almost being impolite while talking about anti-corruption efforts. He shocked American and British diplomats at a meal in Kyrgyzstan by lecturing them on how governments should disregard public opinion and raving about media. Andrew's conceit humiliated them rather than demonstrating British ideals. But it wasn't arrogance that was his worst fault. He couldn't help but be flattering. Businessmen soon discovered that they could gain access to a British prince with a few compliments. Andrew became friends with Kazakh oligarchs and sold his house, Sunning Hill Park, to one of them for €15 million, €3 million more than it was originally listed for. Suspicions that the sale was a shady favor rather than a legal transaction were confirmed when the residence was found to be unoccupied and decaying. He was continually being asked about money. What was the source of his wealth? And who was paying for his extravagant way of living? Ghislaine Maxwell intervened in this situation and introduced him to Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein seemed ideal to Andrew because he was well off, well connected, and could give him the glitzy lifestyle he so desperately desired. Epstein provided Andrew with relevancy, which he had been without for years. All of a sudden, the prince who was dissolving into disdain was able to enter the millionaire, celebrity, and model circles of New York power. He made no inquiries concerning Epstein's history. Or maybe he didn't give a damn. Even though Britain no longer regarded him like king, it was important that Epstein did. Andrew started going to Epstein's properties on a regular basis. He later flew on Epstein's private jet, according to flight logs. He was seen by witnesses at Epstein's New York residence. Even after Epstein had been imprisoned for sexual offenses, he was photographed strolling beside Epstein in Central Park. The fact that a senior royal would hang out with a convicted sexual offender shocked the entire globe. For Andrew, everything went according to plan. Disregarding Epstein's actions as unhelpful gossip, he thought his own name was strong enough to survive any scandal. Then the picture appeared. Virginia Jew, a 17-year-old girl, said in 2001 that Epstein and Maxwell had trafficked her and coerced her into having sex with influential individuals. She mentioned Prince Andrew as one of those men. Maxwell was smiling in the backdrop of the picture, which showed him smiling in a townhouse in London with his arm wrapped around her bare waist. It was a minor, unmemorable moment for Andrew. The verdict was damaging to the globe. Everything was refuted by Andrew. Despite the photo proving otherwise, he maintained that he had no recollection of meeting her. He asserted that he had never visited Maxwell's townhouses upstairs. His justification seemed flimsy, and every time he denied that he had any motive to connect with Jew, the feeling that he was lying grew. Despite the palace's best efforts, the tale continued to worsen. More information about Andrew and Epstein's acquaintance was discovered by journalists, including the fact that Andrew remained at Epstein's residence in New York following Epstein's imprisonment. The idea of a monarch entering the house of a man convicted of child trafficking was unimaginable to most people. It was just a convenient location to stay, as far as Andrew was concerned. When more women opposed Epstein came forward, both press stories and court documents replicated Andrew's name. It was too late for the palace to try to keep him out of the scandal. Once derided as a pampered, pointless playboy, the man was now associated with one of the most sinister criminal organizations of the contemporary era. Once written off as conceit or eccentricity, his actions were now viewed as harmful. Screaming over drapes, berating staff, and demanding teddy bears didn't sound like kidnapping anymore. They sounded like the characteristics of a man who had never learnt boundaries, never been told no, and never experienced repercussions. Britain has put up with Andrew's excesses, spending, womanizing, and haughtiness for years. However, Epstein made him into a burden that the monarchy was unable to overlook. The walls of the palace could not conceal the fact that he had gone too far. And now his real demise had begun. After 2019, Prince Andrew's life was no longer typical of a senior royal. After walking at the Queen's side and moving freely in a military uniform, the so-called honorable prince was suddenly a man without a role. He lost his royal patronage. His calendar was cleared and military associations were withdrawn. But losing appearances was only one aspect of the harm. The monarchy itself was silently erasing Andrew. Even while the number of his controversies kept increasing, it wasn't just the private photo with a child that made them more sinister. He was shielded for so long by the patterns of power. According to American investigators, Epstein's network comprised aristocracy, CEOs, lawyers, and politicians. Although many were questioned, Andrew was shielded for decades by his status as the Queen's son. The fact that he was connected to Epstein was not the only discovery. The monarchy in Britain had protected him from responsibility. According to 2020 reports, the palace exerted pressure on news networks to suppress stories for years. On a hot mic, an ABC anchor confessed that she had the story 3 years prior, but she was stopped because it involved influential people. Ordinary men accused of the same thing would never have been able to enjoy the silence that Andrew did. In addition, he had the terrible interview that ultimately destroyed all he had ever valued. He made a fool of himself in the public display known as the Dreadful Interview, in 2019. Andrew had to engage in an extreme admissions battle as a result of Virginia's accusations. Andrew said he had been somewhere else, at a Woking Pizza Express. A girl claims that Jeffrey Epstein trafficked her for sex that night. To elicit sympathy, he brought up dads and daughters, but his admission that he didn't perspire during that dance due to an odd medical condition was the tidbit that went viral. He said that his perspiration glands were somehow cut off by too much adrenaline during the Falklands War. His incapacity to perspire had evolved into a strange, self-satirizing defense mechanism. He gained notoriety for his most famous public admission, which was a refusal rather than a confession of guilt. "I don't perspire." He wasn't silent as the accusations were rolling in. That same youngster, who thought the world was his playground, who kicked horses, who infuriated the guards, and who considered staff suffering to be a joke. For the first time, he understood what repercussions really meant. The royal palace promptly threw him out after forcing him to make the announcement. After his disastrous interview with Emily Maitlis on BBC News Night 4 days prior, Prince Andrew declared on November 20, 2019, that he will leave public service for the foreseeable future. He tried to defend his acquaintance with Jeffrey Epstein in the interview that aired on November 16, 2019, but it was widely criticized instead. Strong public indignation was sparked by his denial that he had ever met Virginia Jew, his assertion that he was incapable of perspiring, and his belief that remaining at Epstein's house was the morally right thing to do. Companies, colleges, and non-profit organizations immediately started severing their connections with him. Because of the intense criticism, Andrew released a statement claiming that his relationship with Epstein had seriously disrupted the royal family's operations. It was the first time a senior royal has been pushed into semi-retirement due to a public scandal, and the Queen authorized his resignation from duties. That's not all, though. Andrew stayed out of the U.S. even after Epstein passed away in 2019 and Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested in 2020. Attempts to take him to court were resisted by his solicitors. Before Virginia eventually filed a lawsuit against him in a New York court in 2021, he evaded being served papers on multiple occasions. For Andrew, that case was disastrous. The Queen had to pay for a portion of his settlement, which was reportedly worth up to £12 million, in order to prevent a public trial rather than as an admission of guilt. But the world knew what had just transpired. A prince had written a take a look at to silence accusations of sex abuse. But if the agreement buried the prison fight, it failed to bury the shame. The timing couldn't have been worse. Britain became in financial decline. The monarchy was reeling from Prince Harry and Meghan's go out. And then got here Prince Philip's death in 2021. Cameras nevertheless caught him. His disgraced picture, on foot silently beside his siblings, became the comparison to the person he as soon as changed into. A proud naval officer, a Falklands veteran, the Queen's favorite. Through 2022, while Queen Elizabeth died, Andrew's presence at royal ceremonies turned into carefully managed. He became banned from carrying his military uniform in the course of her funeral procession, allowed simplest a brief exception at the lying-in country. Crowds booed when he regarded. Hecklers shouted, "You're a sick antique man." And Scotland police arrested a protester for demanding him. For the primary time in centuries, a British prince couldn't even appear in public without going through open hostility. But in the back of palace partitions, another battle was unfolding. Charles, now king, quietly made it clean that Andrew could in no way return to frontline royal duties. Assets close to the monarchy leaked that Andrew begged for reinstatement, insisting he nonetheless had a function to play, but the solution turned into company. There was no function left. Reports claimed Andrew even considered prison routes to pressure his way back into public obligations. His desperation discovered what he feared maximum, that without the palace, he becomes simply a disgraced man stripped of identity. And by using 2024, he changed into completed with this new allegation. A Chinese businessman regarded in court docket papers as H6, later identified as Yang Tonghua, become banned from the UK in March 2023 by means of Domestic Secretary Suella Braverman on national security grounds. Judges inside the unique Immigration Appeals Commission observed that H6 had received an uncommon diploma of accept as true with Prince Andrew. Documents confirmed that H6 changed into legal by way of Andrew's advisor, Dominic Hampshire, to act on his behalf for talks with capability buyers in China. A letter from Hampshire to H6 stated, "Out of doors of the prince's closest inner confidants, you take a seat at the very top of a tree that many humans would really like to be on." Authorities believe H6 is linked to the United Front Work Department, a part of the Chinese Communist birthday party utilized and have an effect on operations. On H6 gadgets have been files indicating links to CCP officers and tries to leverage his dating with Prince Andrew for political or commercial enterprise advantage. Prince Andrew's office has stated that he ceased all contact with H6 once issues were raised and that he simplest met him through legit channels and never mentioned something of a sensitive nature.